Now, one senator you won't hear from is Republican Senator from Alaska, Dan Sullivan. He had a family member pass away. I believe it's his father-in-law. He has gone back. That's why we believe that this vote, which should end in a matter of minutes, will be roughly 50-49 and pass narrowly. I want to bring our congressional correspondent, Chad Pergram, back in. Chad, it's a very historic vote, but it's predictable.
Right. You know, they thought that they would be able to get everybody on board here on the Democratic side of the aisle. And this is why Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, worked so hard with Joe Manchin yesterday, trying to make sure that he had him on board. Again, it probably helped Democrats a little bit, the fact that under very unfortunate circumstances, Dan Sullivan, the Republican senator from Alaska, had to go back because his father-in-law died. But that means the math was 50-49 if they got Manchin on board here. Otherwise, you had Manchin maybe on the other side of the issue here. That's why they negotiated with him for so long. 12 hours. There was a big delay yesterday on this process as they worked out an agreement with him to lengthen the period of time for these extra unemployment benefits, but also to decrease the number, the dollar figure from $400 to $300. And as I say, this is a drama in 3 acts. The real drama is going to come next week in the House of Representatives. There are a lot of liberal Democrats who do not like these changes in the bill. They knew as soon as they passed the bill over to the Senate that they were going to have to strip out provisions dealing with the minimum wage. They put that to the parliamentarian, Elizabeth McDonough. There's something called the Byrd Rule, which says you cannot put non-budget related items in a budget reconciliation package. What does that mean? Well, Democrats realized that they could not pass this bill and overcome a filibuster. It takes 60 votes to beat back a filibuster. So once a year, once a fiscal year, you can put a budget reconciliation package together. It means it reduces the total amount of time to debate the bill and lowers the bar for passage. No filibusters, just 51 votes. You don't need 60 votes. So you need to keep everybody on your side. So they thought that they could probably do this if they could keep Joe Manchin in line, also Kyrsten Sinema, the Democratic senator from Arizona, maybe pluck off Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, someone like that, and maybe pass the bill with Vice President Harris casting the tie vote. Keep in mind yesterday, Griff, just to get onto the bill, that they had to bring in Vice President Harris to vote to proceed. The vote was 51-50. Just to get onto the bill. I should say that was Thursday. A lot of the days are bleeding together here because, as you know, the Senate was in session from Wednesday until about 2:09 on Thursday after Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin made the clerk read the entire 600-plus page, what we call a substitute amendment. That's essentially the new text of the bill. And then they had the longest vote in Senate history yesterday. Started at 11:03. It ended almost 12 hours later as they negotiated off stage with Joe Manchin. The process there was, and in fact, that was an effort by Bernie Sanders to skip over the Senate rules and put the $15 minimum wage increase back in to the COVID bill, and that just didn't work out. They needed 60 votes to do that in order to waive budget rules, and he only got 42 votes there. So when this goes back to the House, Democrats and liberals are going to have to make a real decision here. Do they want to imperil the presidency of Joe Biden and blow up this bill? As I always say, it's always about the math. They could only lose 4 votes in the House of Representatives. And these changes on unemployment insurance, the fact that the minimum wage is not in this piece of legislation, that could have pretty serious consequences for passing this bill. And so Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden have to say, look, this is the only train leaving the station. You got not a half loaf, you probably got 80 to 90% of a loaf. And it's probably, frankly, not going to be the last coronavirus bill that they do. So maybe they will live to fight another day. But that's going to be the conversation next week. And that's why next week in the House of Representatives may be the most intense we have seen, probably since the Republicans were trying to pass health care reform a couple of years ago, repeal and replace Obamacare.
Chet, from a practical standpoint, I'm curious if Speaker Pelosi is able to pull this off. It can bring those 4 Democrats around. And actually, we're going to listen to the vote down right now. And and some may be clapping just because they finally get a chance to shut their eyes for a bit, Chad. But back to the question that I was asking is if the Speaker Pelosi is able to pull this off next week in the House, from a practical standpoint, what should Americans expect next? And what would the timeline be?
Well, I would think Wednesday or Thursday, but knowing the way things usually go around here, the House of Representatives is supposed to be out, on Thursday afternoon. I would not be surprised if, frankly, we are going through similar calisthenics next week at Friday night, Saturday morning. It's just the way things go here on Capitol Hill. They never do things till the very end. They didn't pass the initial version in the House of Representatives until just after 2 o'clock last Saturday morning. They didn't even begin the debate until 11:35. You vote when you have the votes. It takes whatever amount of time it does to get the votes together. And here's the problem for Nancy Pelosi and President Biden. They are facing competing pressures from different wings of their caucus. For instance, you had Jared Golden, who is a second-term Democrat from Maine who voted against the coronavirus bill last time. There were 2 Democratic no's. And he is a moderate, and so they don't like what's in this bill already. And then if you have liberals like Bonnie Watson-Coleman, a Democrat from New Jersey, or maybe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Watson-Coleman expressed in very stark terms her opposition to what the Senate had done to this bill. You know, the math doesn't work in Nancy Pelosi's favor. And that's the problem when you have a 221 to 211 House of Representatives, 221 Democrats to 211 Republicans. And because the House of Representatives, the makeup of its members really tilts to the left. But you can't pass left-wing legislation when your vote margin is somewhere in the middle. And that's where, the same thing happened in the Senate here when you have a 50-50 Senate. That's why Joe Manchin has been so influential. As I said earlier this morning, he's probably the most powerful figure in Washington, D.C. right now. He held up this process for 12 hours. And so those competing factions within the House of Representatives is going to be key. And it's just not on this vote, Alicia. Yeah. It's going to be when they try to do immigration reform, try to do, firearms legislation. They can't do those big ticket items that are so important to progressives.
Chad, I think you really put your finger on something, because when it comes to Manchin's stance, centrist Joe Manchin, it was over the unemployment benefits. And for the backdrop and perspective, those benefits run out March 14th, which is a week from tomorrow. But really, he wanted those unemployment benefits down from 400 to 300. He held up this process for some 8 hours, and he got his way. So what message does it send back to the progressives who are not going to be happy about this lowering of the unemployment benefits? People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's going to see Joe Manchin getting his way or the highway, coming back to the House on a tight deadline, knowing they could exert some pressure on Speaker Pelosi.
Right, and they'll say, what's in it for us? Why do you kowtow to Joe Manchin, a moderate Democrat, when we, make up the bulk of our caucus? Why don't we get what we want? And so they might be able to get everybody together, those liberals, and make this case, and this probably involves some arm twisting from President Biden and certainly Nancy Pelosi. She's the best vote counter in Congress, probably best vote counter probably since Sam Rayburn in the House of Representatives. She usually gets the votes, usually wins votes by narrow margins, and that's, what she did last week, and it's likely that she'll probably do it again this week. But at some point, does that levee break on this bill, where the liberals walk and say this bill is too middle of the road, or when they can't do a separate minimum wage increase bill, a standalone bill, or when it comes to firearms legislation, or when it comes to climate change policy? I mean, pick your poison here. Those are things that are going to be problems and fissures inside the Democratic caucus, Griff.
A lot to be watching, and nobody better to explain it. Chad Pergram on Capitol Hill. Chad, thank you very much.